Matrix data.
I've got that lightning inside me, son of a god. I'm like a titan that's rising, oh, just you watch. I'm stepping in the fade. There is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me. This is how legends are made.
Hello there, and welcome to the second edition of Ships of the Line. This time we're going to be featuring the Royal Navy cruisers. And we're going to be going from World War I all the way through World War II and into a little bit beyond. So get ready for a long one and plenty of ship names and confusion. So first and foremost, we are happy to announce that we have reached 25,000 members on our official Discord. We're doing a giveaway for that in connection with this stream. And we'll be giving away, I believe it's 2 Cheshires, 2 Londons, and 2 Exeters, and as well as some containers and some goodies. So be sure to go into our Discord, into our announcements channel, and react to the recent announcement for the Discord giveaway, and we will be taking winners randomly from those reactions. And so I'm not here alone either. I'm joined here with the master of British cruisers, and that would be TheSailingRobin himself.
Well, hello guys. I wouldn't say I'm the master of British cruisers, but
tonight
I'll be helping Lane throughout his stream and just be in the background, making sure everything goes smoothly, and also trying to provide as good of a gameplay I can possibly give. So hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. You won't hear me a lot tonight. Is Lane's stream. He's the man on the couch tonight, and he's the one with all the info. So yes, there is a giveaway going on our Discord. You can find the links for Twitch. You can just look below, and there's all the links you need for our Discord. Same on YouTube. In the description of the stream, you should find a link for that too. So make sure to check this out. Congratulations for all of our Discord users for reaching 25K. That's amazing. And I will leave it to Mr. Princeblip at this point. That's him. It's all yours.
All right. So we're starting off today with Royal Navy cruisers, starting basically right before World War I, around 1910. So for one thing to keep in mind with Royal Navy cruisers, if I look at my notes here, there's a few major roles that cruisers need to serve in the British Navy. The British has a huge empire spanning over 1/4 of the world's surface area at this time, and they need protection and influence everywhere. So you have to consider that these cruisers need to be able to afford trade route protection. They need to be able to be a screen for the fleet actively to defend against destroyers, as well as enemy cruisers, and also provide reconnaissance, because at this time, there's no radar, there's no aircraft really yet. So you have basically a relay of cruisers who are radioing to each other, and doing a scouting role. And also, they have to project the influence of the empire. It's not necessarily just you have to project trade routes, but also allies' trade routes and more or less control the seas. So these cruisers have to be able to go everywhere, do everything, and perform well in that role. Hang on, could you direct microphone input?
Can you guys hear all of us, right?
Yes. Sorry,
Can
so
you check if you have the correct microphone input for you? The sound is picking up the other one. Okay, let me check that real quick.
yeah, we want to make sure that the sound is right.
You guys should be able to hear me, right? Or am I low? Am I high or low? Robin is fine. Robin needs more volume. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, maybe I was talking a little bit away from the microphone. That's
Okay.
why you thought. So
Yeah.
I'll make sure to talk a bit closer from the microphone. If I go like this, you guys won't hear me as high as if I go like this. So,
Okay.
apologies.
So we just wanted to make sure before we get going. So before in the as we're getting towards World War one of the major changes for the Royal Navy is the introduction of radio. So the importance of this means that they can reduce the amount of cruisers they need, covering trade protection, because you can triangulate basically where you need to be whenever a merchantman signals for help, or if you spot something, you can relay messages much further and don't need as many ships, therefore, to cover as much area. So you see a reduction in the amount of cruisers built, as well as an increase in size and capability of cruisers over time, because they need to be able to cover more distance, and also they just need to be more powerful. So it's a huge change in the world with radio, and I think it's probably understated how much radio changes the way naval warfare works. The British are always on guard when it comes to technology, at least when it comes to electronic technology in naval circles. We'll see a little bit more about engines later, but it's very much a forefront and a very important thing in the early cruiser development. So with cruisers and World of Warships Legends, sorry, Robin, you have a question already?
One question. So basically, we start essentially the real first modernization for, I guess, British cruisers is just radio communication, being able to communicate between each other and organize themselves in battle. Like, that's the first big loop that happens for them.
Yeah, especially for like the cruisers that we know today. There were cruisers long beforehand, especially ships that performed a cruising role. But the trade protection and sort of empire influence cruiser hugely benefits from radio.
From radios, okay.
And so where we start in World of Warships Legends is with the town class cruiser, the first town class. Well, the town class cruiser Weymouth. There is another later town class in the 30s. And so Weymouth is basically as basic as it can get in terms of a protected cruiser. There's not much special about it. It has enough armor for the time, especially against 4-inch guns, which the Germans at this point were using 4.1-inch guns. And they found that these were protected against 4.1-inch guns because the 4.1-inch gun was pretty rubbish. And so you have a class of 4 cruisers from about 1910, and they're very much a small cruiser. They're less than 6,000 tons, which is about double the size of the largest destroyers from World War II. They have problems. These ships are not very good sea boats in terms of gunnery platforms. They roll back and forth quite a lot, meaning that it's hard to hit targets with it. And they also have gaps underneath the gun shields. You might be able to just see them a little bit. But it was found during some of the battles of these cruisers that splinters would find their ways underneath gun shields.
Oh, yes, you can see it, definitely.
And you have people standing there.
I must hurt their feet a little bit.
You have, and so there were a lot of casualties, especially at Jutland, coming from splinters basically ruining people's shins and feet from just getting underneath these splinter gun shields. And they learned later on that a turret very much benefits the morale and safety of a crew, even if it's a very thin turret.
Yeah, you can definitely see that there's at least like 20 centimeters below the gun shield that just isn't protected. Okay.
Yeah. So guys, the giveaway is on Discord. So be sure to go to Discord and go to the announcements channel and react to the most recent announcement there. And we'll be taking winners from there and message them via Discord. So It was not quite fast enough of a ship for working against destroyers. So they wanted to improve on that, and essentially there are a few other cruisers at this time, but the major one that comes next is the Caledon, not Caledon herself, but the C-class cruisers. These are primarily fleet defense and anti-destroyer. In the first versions, they had a mixed armament. You would have 152 millimeter guns on the end of the ship, so the last two guns of the ship, and then you would have a mixed battery of 4-inch guns across the ship for higher rate of fire anti-destroyer work. They found that this didn't really work. At the time, fire control was being developed for battleships, and then they were reflecting that into the cruisers, and they found that having a armament of all the same guns really makes fire control easy and more effective. So in later versions of this class, which is the Caledon/Calypso class, or subclass, they went to an all 6-inch gun, 152 millimeter armament. Go ahead, Robin.
I'm going to raise my hand so I don't
Yeah.
interrupt you. And if I ask one question every now and then, I'm guessing who's switching to the same caliber, at least for the main arm, and kind of normalize the ammunition type
Yeah.
as well. Like you have one type of ammunition for this gun. If one turret gets knocked out, it's fine because that ammo is still viable for another gun.
Yeah, and but the main thing is it really makes it more accurate and a lot more. It's more powerful and it's a homogeneous all round. Instead of having only guns on the rear, you have guns on the front, rear, sides, and you can really focus on enemy targets that you need to much better. And so that's the improvement of the C-class cruisers. Later on, these cruisers end up serving into World War II, and not all of them, but about half of them do. And they get converted into anti-aircraft cruisers. Basically, most or all of the 6-inch guns are removed and replaced with 4-inch guns, and they're just anti-aircraft escorts. And they do a lot of good service in World War II as anti-aircraft cruisers, and like convoy escorts and that sort of thing. One survives today as HMS Caroline, and she was, I don't remember if she was featured in the Longest Nights of Museum stream, but HMS Caroline is the only cruiser of this sort of type left in the world. And
so there's technically still one of these ships existing in the world that you can actually visit as a museum ship.
Yeah, she's a little bit different now because she was rebuilt as like a barracks ship. So she has like a house structure on the end of the ship. But she is a C-class cruiser from the First World War. And if I remember right, she even served at Jutland. So it's pretty interesting.
One quick question, one remark and one question I would have is, I remarked that the way they fixed the splinter issue with the turret is that they actually made like stands.
Yeah.
So the turrets still have a leeway to rotate without scrapping on the deck, but the crew is actually protected because their feet is raised above the deck in that little step thingy on both sides.
Yep.
And the second question I have is it the first cruiser that actually implements flush deck torpedo? Because the Caledon is the first cruiser in the line, at least in our game, that has actually torpedoes.
Yeah, I don't think it's the first cruiser to have them. So you do see torpedoes feature prominently on British cruisers, but they weren't as much of a priority as they would be on other nations' ships like Japan and even to an extent Germany. They valued torpedoes as basically, if there's a ship more powerful than this, a torpedo is a deterrent. Because if it's faster or more powerful than a cruiser, then all you have is basically a torpedo as a way that a torpedo will hurt anything. And so it doesn't matter if you have a 6-inch gun against a battleship, a torpedo's a torpedo. And it's not going to be pretty, anything taking a torpedo. So the C-class do pretty well. They serve for a very long time. You see them sent out to China Station. So Britain has different areas where they assign their cruisers, and the most important area is China Station. And so you see a lot of the best cruisers, the most modern cruisers, get sent to China Station because you have to interact with a bunch of different less than friendly powers out there, and also you have to project influence over Japan, which is a growing threat, especially throughout the interwar period for Britain. And then so we're going to get a battle here in
I
the
just
Caledon.
went one game. I don't know if you want, if you still have anything you want to say to cover these,
Yep.
but I figured I will try to see if I can play at least one game with each.
All right.
Just because, you know, it's also fun maybe to have some gameplay in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Just one thing I want to mention, chat. If today we don't quite, I mean, we will read as many questions as we possibly can, but Princeblip has a lot of stuff to tell you
Yep.
today, so we'll focus on this. And what you can do is maybe note a few questions for yourself, and maybe like at the end of the stream or near the end, we can try to have like, you know, just a question sessions where you guys just ask for details and so on.
Yep. So if you have questions, we'll have moments for questions. So save it for then, because I kind of want to steamroll through this because there are so many British cruisers that I underestimated how much work this would be. That's probably why I look a little bit tired. So after the Caledon class in World War II, they decided that they needed to build a little bit larger of a ship, and they wanted to get a little bit more capability, especially in terms of torpedo firepower. As early as this time, they were starting to get reports that Japan was looking very heavily into torpedoes, but that wasn't as much of a concern because this was still during World War I. And so they wanted to build an improved Caledon class, and this becomes the D class, or the Danae class, that we know from Tier 3 in Legends. The major change is that you get one more 6-inch gun, which is super firing on the front of the ship. So you have 2 guns on the very front, and that's just more firepower. The bridge is moved backwards on the ship a little bit, and this helps with sea keeping. Essentially, if you have weight forward on the ship, it causes rolling problems whenever you're dealing with waves. And that was essentially the way it goes sometimes. This is, but the thing that Danae brings about, so that is Caledon. We're going to bring up. Oh wait, no, that's Enterprise. But no, that's Hawkins. But the thing, I don't have a picture of Danae. That's right. So Danae brings brings the first instance of what's called a knuckle bow or a trawler bow. If you can pull it up on the port here, the advantage of, or this is, if you look at the very bow, there's a sort of, at the very front of it, there's sort of a bump before it reaches the top. You'll see this on basically almost all British cruisers after Danae. And the idea of this is that whenever the bow is plunging into the water, it will move the water outwards rather than upwards. And so so you can go through water at a higher speed while having less water coming onto the deck. It's just a little design feature that really only shows up on the British ships, and is kind of almost a signature feature of many of these ships.
So wake protection, essentially.
Yeah, so the idea is that you get less water onto the front guns and the bridge, and makes things just nicer for the crew, especially the forward crew.
Less ice to remove afterwards if you're up there.
Yep.
I see.
So and that's the more torpedoes were desired for these ships, but already by this point they were noting that submerged torpedoes do not work for cruisers, because essentially submerged torpedoes, you have so much water flowing past a submerged torpedo tube that as you're launching the torpedo, it gets torqued by the hull. And so you have to design very specific setup to launch them. And if you're going more than like 20 knots, it's basically impossible to launch a submerged torpedo, which is why they remove it from cruiser designs and don't go on with it basically from Danae onward. They try, the Danae also introduces, they try to do aircraft. Aircraft kind of shows up in all of the British cruiser designs. Not all of them end up having it in service. Danae does not. They try to do it off of the front gun, basically, and but they get removed very quickly towards the end of the war and right after World War I. They thought aircraft would be very important for fire control as well as for scouting, but they didn't really get it working until the 30s.
At the same time, were there already cruisers of the same class or not that were already employing any kind of aircraft in their active service?
So these ships during World War I have a flying off platform, and so they try to use aircraft a little bit in like 1918. It's not super effective, and they find that it's more problematic for the bridge crew because essentially the wind flow coming off of the flying off platform would be very harsh on the bridge crew. Just the way that aerodynamics was working, and so they decided to get rid of it. The Danaes continue to serve. They serve, and after World War I, they immediately, almost all of them, get sent to China Station, and they serve a lot of time out on the far reaches of the Empire, and do a lot of good service out there. These were designed again as kind of anti-destroyer fleet screeners and trade protection.
Is there any pictures in our folder that we have about
not for Danae, so
not for this one. All right. Well, I'll just try to queue in a game really quickly.
Yep.
Maybe we should for the low tiers. I should go with AI so the games are over a bit quickly.
Maybe, yeah. So and then the next series of 2 ships is the Emerald class. There were more planned, but only 2 of them got made because the war ended. There was less need for new cruisers, less funding for new cruisers, probably more importantly. And they basically, the people using cruisers very actively in the war wanted to have basically a larger cruiser that was more capable and much faster. And so the Emerald design comes from this, the Harwich Force commander, which is our commander in game, Tyrwhitt, or Twit. Yeah, depending on how you pronounce it, there's many different pronunciations. Also, there are so many pronunciations for a lot of these cruisers that I'll end up getting them wrong. I'm just going to Americanize everything. And so Tyrwhitt is the guy that kind of spearheads the Emerald.
It's a bit of a discrepancy here. We're playing the name, but we'll get onto the Emerald visually. Maybe there's an image of it that we can find.
Yep, there is. So this is...
There she is.
No, that's Kaladin.
That is not, yeah.
That's Hawkins. This is Enterprise. No, wait.
It does look like an emerald, though.
This is Enterprise. So this is HMS Enterprise, which is not USS Enterprise. And it is Emerald's sister ship. You'll notice something a little bit different with Enterprise. Is the front turret there is a twin turret rather than a single gun. On Enterprise, you have basically a single gun and I believe a super firing gun. Maybe not a super firing, but basically they tested the first twin turret in the Royal Navy on HMS Enterprise, and they found that it worked fairly well, and Enterprise kept this turret throughout their entire service into World War II. And it was found to be a pretty excellent class, and served for quite a long time. It's a completely new design. They don't base it off Danae, and it's basically a new design hull with a trawler bow, all these sort of things. They wanted to have 3 guns minimum facing forward for basically a chasing interaction, and they wanted more torpedoes and more speed. And they didn't really get more torpedoes, but they definitely got more speed. These ships were pretty much the fastest cruisers the British built. And even in World War II, they were very fast. The HMS Enterprise managed to outrun a brand new Baltimore-class cruiser in 1944, as well as a New Orleans-class cruiser. At Normandy, they were doing a bombardment mission and had to reposition. And so HMS Enterprise, as well as USS Quincy, which is the Baltimore, and USS Tuscaloosa, left to reposition and basically raced there. Enterprise beat both of them, despite being like 20 years older than them. 20 years older than Quincy. So like these were pretty fast ships, the Emerald and Enterprise. Probably the most important thing about these ships is Enterprise's twin turret, which goes on to be the basis for the design of Nelson's twin turrets for her secondary guns, and it goes on to be the basis for the design of later twin turrets, and proves the concept to the Royal Navy. And so that's the element of the Emerald class, pretty important. A lot of the later designs try to use the engineering from Enterprise, but end up going with a different version. And so the thing with these cruisers is that they're like, by World War II, they're not super capable, but they're still in service. And so they see a lot of like kind of second line roles, convoy protection, shore bombardment, and less important hot areas tend to be where these ships go. If I remember right, a couple of the Danae class end up in the service of the Polish Navy. Might be a couple of Kaladins. And they do pretty well there. And so we're going to let Robin finish off this battle here. And
maybe you should start. In this case, because like I went a little bit below the time here. Maybe if there's a downtime like this where we're not showcasing the right ship, we should take on some questions.
Yep.
Because I feel like if I play a game every ship, Princeblip might just stroll through the entire thing with the wrong ship on display, which is a bit of a shame.
So go ahead and play one in Emerald. And
but I see that as you said, the bow literally has even a bigger emphasis on this wake, like much longer than the Caledon.
Oh yeah, another thing with Enterprise I just remembered, and Emerald, they also feature a new bridge design. It's more box shaped. It's kind of the beginning of the box shaped bridge, but it's not perfect. They try to replicate it again, and they keep making modifications to it. We'll see more about the bridges later. Bridge designs, because bridge design is very important for a cruiser because you're going to be spending a lot of time there, and they tend to also control flotillas of destroyers and often are flagships. So they're pretty important for a cruiser.
Like the three main points of improvements from was it Caledon beforehand? Caledon Emerald, like clearly are the three biggest improvements.
So the biggest improvements would be speed. Enterprise and Emerald are rated for just over 33 knots, which is really good for World War I standards. And there is a bridge design that has a nickname, not this one. The Queen Anne's Mansion is a different bridge. And then so you have greater speed, definitely. I would say the ability to use aircraft is another one. You can see a catapult on the end here. Enterprise is really big enough to actually use aircraft more reliably. And then I would say just more firepower and a more standard layout. It still does have wing guns, but most of them are centerline guns.
And torpedoes seems to be as well a lot of torpedoes compared to like other tubes. The Emerald's carrying in Legends historical compared to what she would have been carrying in her service, like 4 quintuple tubes essentially.
I can't remember the exact details of the torpedo tubes over time. They did not start with. Okay, so the Emeralds started with triple tubes, and they were authorized for quadruple tubes in the early 1920s, but they didn't get them until 1928 or 29, if I remember right. And so, but quintuple tubes, I don't think were ever on the Emeralds. Let's see if there's anything. Oh yeah. So one thing to notice with the Emeralds is that they also have wing guns.
So it's not all centerline as it used to
Yeah.
be before.
Those allow for 3 guns firing forward. That's the idea behind those.
Oh.
So, which was one of the design requirements.
Yes, you definitely can.
So, yeah. So there are no plans for adding HMS Enterprise at this time, but it's an interesting ship. I could see it coming at some point, but it's not a priority. Does anybody have any questions so far? So we're pretty much through World War I at this point with the Emeralds. The Emerald and Enterprise don't see service in World War I, but they're very much a design from the lessons of World War I, and are a result of that. They were meant to come out at the end of like 1918 into 1919, but they end up getting delayed by funding cuts and lower priority.
How many of from the start to finish? How many? Oh, that's an island. How many of each ships were built in total?
Oh, okay.
Starting from Weymouth all the way to well, the one we're currently at, and I am stuck.
So there were 21 town class cruisers, which is Weymouth's class, and then there were 28 C class cruisers, which is astounding. That is, if you count the C class as one homogeneous class, which is not really the case, but if you choose to do so, they are actually the most produced light cruiser of all time. The next would be Cleveland class, which was 27. But most people do not count the C class as one big unit because the capabilities of the ships vary dramatically from the beginning to the end of the C class. Oh, that's a good question. Why do the British light cruisers only fire armor piercing?
Yes.
That is a really good question. I want to answer that question.
Indeed.
So so in World War II, like World War II and World War I, these British light cruisers absolutely did have high explosive shells and did use them. It's not something that's like, oh, they never had HE cells, so we're not going to give it to them. It's mostly a gameplay thing that it's only AP. But the point of the armor-piercing shells in World of Warships and World of Warships Legends is that they mimic the effects of what's called a common pointed ballistic cap shell, or the common shell, which is, in essence, is a semi-armor piercing shell. So it is it's a heavier high explosive shell with a timed fuse so that it detonates inside the ship, but is not meant to be like a pure armor piercing shell. And that's what this is supposed to mimic the effect of. So that's why they shoot AP in World Warships. It's not that they didn't have AP or HE in real life. It's more of a gameplay thing. Mm-hmm. So, and it would be a little bit broken to have both the super armor piercing and HE for these cruisers.
All right. Because the penetration angle on these guns is essentially
right. It has
better.
has improved penetration angles. It has short fuses, and I think also improved ricochet angles.
Yes, they do. Yeah. You're less likely to ricochet at a certain angle than other shells.
Yeah. So I'll answer the question about the Fiji class whenever we get to the Fijis.
We'll get there, guys.
So we have plenty of time.
Yeah. Like
Well,
we don't have
we
a
say that,
planned
but we're
schedule.
35 minutes in.
Like, we don't quite have a planned schedule. Like it's supposed to be 2 hours, but we can go over if the needs arise, essentially. Oh, hi, Pensacola. I hope you don't have a piloted, because otherwise I'm dead.
Ooh.
Oh, there's an AFK battleship too.
Interesting thing about the Pensacola class is that they are not designed to be shot at with a 6-inch gun. So
I mean, if he gets the riddle before I do, I'm okay, good. And this guy is AFK, so we are gonna gladly just stop him, and then we're gonna get killed by Geddes and yeah, because that's it. Oh, that's the wrong. Ouch, that's rude, good sir.
oh no,
That is really rude. Oh,
there's no plan for a Joey flag. It was a good meme, but there's no plan for a flag for that. So the so
alright, back to port.
all right. So moving on to the next class of cruisers, and this is kind of the last of like the World War I style of cruisers with single-mounted guns, and that is the Hawkins class.
Hold on, I'm really sorry. I just want to see if I hit this Geddes and yeah or not. No, she dodged. Alright, back to port.
So so I call the Hawkins class kind of the dawn of the heavy cruiser. It's really these are the first look at at going towards an 8-inch gun. These are 7.5-inch guns, but they're moving towards 8-inch, and they're really designed as a like kind of a stopping power gun. The idea is that they would be able to stop a ship with a single shell and basically work in very quickly into the into taking out surface raiders. And so you can these are surprisingly slow ships. They're like only 27 knots, but it's very well protected for a cruiser. And they're getting up towards 10,000 tons, which we see is and which is a reason for the 10,000 ton limit in the Washington Naval Treaty of 1921, which kind of sets the top end of cruisers as they should be, even though people cheat. And so the Hawkins class existing means that the limit has to be 10,000 tons.
Okay.
So because the Hawkins come around before really the treaty gets determined. And so if they're building a Hawkins class and finishing the Hawkins class, and then they say, oh, the limit is less than 10,000 tons, and you have to get rid of these ships, that's not going to be a very good image for the Royal Navy, having just spent all this money on a brand new cruiser. And so they have to basically give in and say 10,000 is the limit, 8-inch guns are the limit, and that's why the treaty cruiser becomes so large in comparison to previous cruisers.
To some extent, just a quick remark, this one doesn't have the special bow, doesn't look
No, it does not. So the Hawkins class kind of comes from a little bit of a different design evolution, and they were kind of built, or the development for these starts in like 1914-ish, and at first the Navy is against them. They're like, it's way too big, too powerful. There's no reason for it. The Germans are only now getting to 6-inch guns. Like, why would we go even further beyond and make something so huge and expensive? And so the design just keeps kind of going and going and going, and it doesn't see all of the improvements that you get in like the Emeralds. And so and this is one of the first designs that's influenced by the Commonwealth. The Australians order HMAS Adelaide design, and one of the proposed design is basically this with a 7.5-inch gun,
Which translates to centimeters to.
190 centimeters. So
Okay.
The Australians originally order this, and so this is HMS Raleigh, I believe, one of the Hawkins class. And I'll get to the quarterdeck in a hot minute. But like the Australians order this design, it doesn't end up being that way, but it kind of plants the idea in the Royal Navy's mind. And so if we look at it in game real quick again,
Disable it.
the rear gun arrangement, you see it has 3 guns there. At the time they didn't have a big turret, so they're having to do single mounts, and they wanted to have as much firepower as they could. So they had this really weird gun arrangement on the rear of the ship, where you have this. It was actually pretty scary to work the back 2 guns, especially because these ships had a major vibration problem. And so you'd be sitting on the end of the ship right above the propellers with lots of vibration and shaking going on. And plus, if you look at the very rear gun, if you're looking broadside over the gun, all the crew's standing behind the gun, and there's no railings back there when you're in battle. And so you're standing there with this vibrating ship, giant gun working it, and you have like no room to stand. And this was a major concern for a lot of captains of these ships. Were basically like, we need to get railings, we need to have something that keeps the crew from falling off the ship because we're really afraid of this. An interesting questions here. I saw about the camouflage that we have here on our Hawkins, the Victorian camouflage. This is actually the camouflage that the British used in the China station during the 1920s. The Danae class had this camouflage at one point, and a few of the Hawkins also got it, if I remember right. It's a peacetime camouflage. So, Robin?
One question I would have is, at this time, was the definition of a heavy and light cruiser already settled?
No.
No. So this wasn't considered as a heavy cruiser by any means, even if the caliber.
Yeah, it was. They were even called light cruisers.
Okay.
Because they were not armored cruisers, so they were light cruisers. It's just kind of what they were. But the definition that we know of as a heavy cruiser today comes around in 1930.
Okay, so that's like 9 years leap from the treaty
Yeah.
you talked about. Okay.
So so essentially this is like the first look at what will be the heavy cruiser, but it's not all the way there yet. So the hull is based off of HMS Furious, which is the large light cruisers of World War I, which were really very small battle cruisers, and weren't very good in terms of being capital ships. But the hull design was very good. It was very fast, so they used it for designing this. And it has a minor bulge, torpedo bulge to it, which was important for the time. And also gave very good buoyancy and freeboard, which freeboard is the distance to the deck from the water at the amidships point. So it gave very good sailing characteristics. We already mentioned the trouble with the rear guns. They're major vibrations. They were wet, and you're almost going to fall off using them. But the main impact of these ships is that they forced the 10,000 ton limit at Washington Naval Treaty. The British were not very happy with this ship. They felt that they could get more out of them, and they even proposed modifying them with twin 8-inch gun turrets, kind of similar to what we'll see in Exeter and York.
8-inch being 2 and a 3.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay.
So-
because 16-inch being 4 or 6 makes
Yep.
sense.
So they wanted to get they wanted to get these ships to be more conventional and a little bit more powerful. They thought about doing this modification, but they found that it would be too expensive, and also it would be problematic in terms of weight, and you would lose ammunition count. So it would basically cost about 20 to 30 rounds per gun in terms of how much ammunition you could carry in the ship, which they thought would be not good.
30 rounds per gun.
Yeah. So
Seems limiting, all right, yes.
yeah, by getting towards World War II, they have removed all of these from service, but they haven't scrapped them yet. So they bring them back into service for World War II, but really as a very much a second or even third line cruiser, because they're not very fast and not very capable by World War II standards. So so after the Washington Naval Treaty comes in 1921, and it's a major game changer in terms of what is the planned design for things. For cruisers, this means that you get to have up to 10,000 tons displacement, which basically almost everybody starts building to that limit. The U.S. start developing the Pensacola class cruisers, which are kind of scary for the British because that's 10 203 millimeter guns, and they're kind of afraid of that. And the Japanese start working on some very interesting 6,000 and 7,000 ton cruiser designs in the Furutaka and the Alba class. And the British are mostly worried at this time about Japan. So all of their cruiser designs are built with Japan in mind and service in the Far East. And so they have to counter what they believe Japan to be building, which is most of the time they believe incorrectly what Japan is building. They have bad intel for a lot of this period. So so now they're pretty much locked in to where they have to build a roughly 10,000 ton cruiser, and so they design and build the Kent class or the County class cruiser.
We're not there yet, gameplay wise.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but we'll get there in a hot minute. The Hawkins end up having a pretty active career in the 1920s while everybody's building things, but they, if I remember right, one of them runs aground. I think that was Raleigh, and basically is out of service from that point on. These ships were kind of rough and not very well liked in general. The main reason they wanted to go towards bigger guns at this point in time was that they felt that they were much better for fire control. And so
regarding the 8-inch guns, you mean this?
Yeah, so larger guns, the 7.5-inch guns also are to this, but they really want to move towards 203 millimeter because they felt that you going from 7.5-inch to 8-inch, 190 to 203 is not much of a cost in weight in terms of how big the gun is, but the advantage you get in terms of shell weight is very, very large compared. Because there's this thing called the squared cube law, where as you increase the volume of an object increases as a square to how, or as a cube to how far you change the diameter. So basically you get a lot more mass out of very small changes in caliber.
So would it be accurate to say that when it comes to cruisers, the bigger the caliber, the more viable the armament would be?
At this time, that was the thinking. It changes in the 30s. Because they think it's easier to see a shell splash at 18,000 and 20,000 yards, or 16 kilometers to 18 kilometers. It's easier to see a shell splash at that distance with an 8-inch gun than it is a 3-inch gun. And it's easier to direct fire with these guns. So because of that. And so
that's not the county.
This is the county.
Oh, it is
this is HMS London. London is of a later part of the county class. But I felt that we have her in game And Devonshire is also part of the same class and doesn't look too much different. The main defining like moment of the county class cruisers is that these are very tall ships, and so the freeboard of these ships is very high. Some people said they look like cruise liners, and so the point of this height is basically so that they're good seakeeping, and they also are very dry and comfortable-ish for the crewmen aboard the ship.
We also see the return of the bow.
Yep.
I'm gonna keep mentioning this for every hull. I
Yeah.
apologize.
And so they find that they could scale up Enterprise's twin turret into an 8-inch gun turret, and they do that. The first cruisers in this class have three stacks and instead of two. And London does whenever she starts off, but her later rebuild in the late 30s gives her 2 stacks, and very similar to
Do we see it on the picture? No, it's
Yeah.
not 2 stacks. Okay.
Yeah. So I've got another picture.
Oh, you do?
So this is HMAS Australia, and you have 3 stacks like Devonshire.
Okay, so if we check out Devonshire, which is right here, we should see a 3 stack. Yes, that's correct. Okay.
Yep. So Devonshire is probably closer to the first original counties in game, and but the original ones, the smokestack's a little shorter, and things are a little bit less cluttered. So there are several subclasses of county class cruisers. Every cruiser pretty much in the British Navy has various subclasses with developments as things go on, because they'll order like 2 or 3 a year, and then the next year they'll improve on it, and so they get divided into subclasses. So
How many of the town class were built in total?
there were 13 built, but there were 15 ordered. And so number 14 and 15 were to be of the Surrey subclass, which we'll get to. And so but they were canceled. So after the war, they get to interview some of the German Navy, and they were asking them about their cruiser designs, and saw that they were planning to go up to 14,000 tons. Well, the Navy asked for 12,000. The Kaiser said 14,000, so that's the way it was going to be. And so there was a clear trend towards these massive cruisers, and so they start work on them pretty early. And also coming out of the Treaty of Versailles discussions, as well as the Washington Naval Treaty discussions, is this magic number the British come up with of 70 cruisers are needed for the empire. And you'll see 70 cruisers at basically every treaty conference going on is like, we need 70 minimum. And that is like their modus operandi is we need 70 cruisers. And part of this also comes from Beatty. I got to get in a sneaky Beatty bash in. Beatty lets slip that the British only really needs 50 cruisers at one point. This, I believe, is that Washington Naval Treaty. And Churchill gets wind of this and uses it as an argument to reduce costs of the Navy, trying to cut down to 50 cruisers rather than 70.
So Churchill agreed?
No, but he used it as a political bargain, more or less, and as a bargaining chip for various purposes. Churchill's basically always for a large navy throughout the war, but will find things that are politically convenient to him. And Beatty kind of put his own foot in the mouth there. And realistically, they only need realistically 50 modern cruisers, and 20 older cruisers was kind of their minimum standard. And that's what Beatty was meaning, more or less, when he said 50. And so one of the major things that goes into this class is the debate of armor. So in World War I, they found out that the armored cruisers tended to not survive. They tended to take damage, much more damage, and in very much worse ways than the protected light cruisers did. Nice. feels good. And so there was a lot of debate between, do we even want to armor these ships, or not? And that debate raged back and forth. Generally speaking, they got to where they wanted to armor the magazines as much as they could, while the engine spaces, they did not really armor that much. And this becomes the armored box. And so you would have armor around the magazines so that you prevent Jutland-style explosions, and at the sacrifice of everything else to save weight. And really, the county class cruisers kind of become the evolution of the battle cruisers of World War I. That's how they're kind of viewed. They're meant to go and do economy raiding and trade protection and long distance sailing, which is the original purpose of the battle cruisers. And also there's another way of seeing these heavy cruisers coming along as like the fighting cruisers. Almost meant to actually do battle much more so than just be an escorting ship, and projection ship. And another requirement is that these ships have to look good, and it's a necessary requirement for a cruiser because you're sailing to other powers and showing these ships off to everybody. Because for one, it's cheaper to do so than sailing a battleship. And second off, it's what their role is to be all over the place and to be showing off. And so they're meant to look imposing and powerful, and that's part of the reason why these ships are so relatively large appearing. And they are very big ships and very expensive ships. The British Parliament, especially the Labour parliaments, did not very much like these ships in the 1920s because they cost a lot. So let's see. They also found that the World War I cruisers, they had built so many of them that they were worried that they were going to reach a point where they have to replace them all at once. And they were really worried about that, and going in through the 1920s. And luckily, it didn't really turn out the case because they could extend the life of those cruisers. So that was the main thing. When it comes to later on, I can't convert the cost into today's money culture. I'm sorry. But the later on, the London class comes along, and the London almost have an entirely redesigned hull compared to not to Devonshire, but to the early county class. Devonshire is part of the same class, so it looks the same.
Yeah, the entire superstructure is essentially rearranged. The bridge has like a much boxier, higher.
Yeah. That happens in the 30s, so that's not how London is built. But the hull itself is, instead of so the hull on the early county class are actually sloped, but you can't see it in game because we don't have an early county class. But whereas on the London class and the Devonshires, you have a slab-sided hull, so it's basically a flat side rather than a curved side. And they actually gain about half a knot in speed off of this because it's smoother and also allowed for some weight savings.
And I guess half a knot was considered a substantial improvement.
For the Royal Navy, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, these ships get modified in the 1930s to increase their armor. There's a lot of speculation that intentional gaps were left in the ships for additional armor plate, because it was very suspiciously easy to add armor to these ships.
I see.
And one of the ways you can kind of tell whenever one of these ships had armor added to them is the portholes on the side of the ship. So if we look here at London, there's no portholes along the waterline. But if we look here at Australia, there's an extra row of portholes.
Okay.
So you can't put a porthole where there's an armor plate.
No.
So
what was the plan behind that mindset of just in case they had to go to war and disrespect the treaty, they could add more tonnage to their ship by adding more armor?
Yeah.
Essentially, just going over the limitations.
Yeah, and it wasn't technically illegal, and it was also like it was like we don't have a document. I don't know of any documents that said this is exactly why we're doing this, but it's very suspicious that that was the case.
It sounds obvious now that Princeblip talks about it, but back in the day, I guess it was crowded within political moves and other ship designs versus what was released and what was intended and so on.
Yeah, and one of the things that is somewhat the reason. So some people say that these ships are relatively inefficient for for a heavy cruiser design, because they only get 8 guns. They're only 32-ish knots, and they're very large. They're not super well armored comparatively to some of the other designs. And a big reason for this is basically the engineering plant that they use in the County class.
Because from that point on, heavy cruiser was a designation already at this point. That was done.
No, not yet.
No, still not. Okay. It's just because
It's just kind of the concept of it.
Mentioned as a heavy cruiser. Okay.
Yeah, and so these are kind of called the Type A cruisers, which is interestingly basically the same way that Japan calls their heavy cruisers. But and so they're like your frontline trade protection cruisers, and some people say that they're very inefficient, and there's a good reason for this. Britain has a very large worldwide empire, and they need their engines to always work in their cruisers. A lot of other nations can build very, very fast cruisers with very compact engineering plants that are not so reliable, and because they don't have to cover as large of an empire, as large of an area. And so that's why the Italian cruisers are so fast, because they only need to go in the Mediterranean. And so they can save a lot of weight and size of the ship by not having to have fuel, and they can also sacrifice reliability a little bit in that matter. So the County classes are designed with a relatively heavy engineering plant that's reliable. They know it will work, and it will. But the cost of that is that it's not a very efficient in terms of weight savings, and kind of makes the design, in some people's view, not the greatest. However, these ships in World War II proved themselves time and time again to be fantastic warships. The U.S. actually, the U.S. technically sinks one of these ships, I believe. Oh,
that was an 8. Sorry, that was an 8 shell salvo hit on that Patagon. Just saying. Wow. Accurate guns, much. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So these ships give excellent service throughout World War II. London gets a full-on rebuild that makes it look like this, which is kind of very Fiji looking, and towards the end of the 1930s, all of the ships in the London class were supposed to get this upgrade, but they didn't. This upgrade actually caused problems for the ship, and because there's just too much weight for the hull to handle, and so they end up removing one of the turrets later on, just to keep the hull the ship from breaking itself. And I want to highlight a couple the Australian ships in this series, or in this class, which they had from the right. They had 3 of them. You can just barely see 2 of them. Here, this is Sydney Harbor in the 1920s. One of these, I believe, is I think this is HMAS Australia in Canberra, but I'm not entirely sure of that. And so Canberra serves at the battle, serves with the U.S. Navy at the Battle of Savile Island, and where basically the U.S. Navy and to an extent Canberra get their rears handed to them by the Japanese. It's the biggest defeat in U.S. history, and it's very possible that the USN sank Canberra at that battle with friendly fire from torpedoes. it's not determined that that's the case, but it's very possible, and I personally believe it to be the case. But today, the U.S. Navy has named a ship in Canberra's honor because it fought. It was the first ship to react to the Japanese at the battle, and kind of in homage to the ship, they've named one of the new LCS. I think it's LCS 20 after HMAS Canberra. So these ships serve excellently throughout basically their entire service into the 1950s even. London is still around until the mid 50s in service, and they just keep going. So they might have had heavy engines, but they worked. And their armor protection was pretty good for cruisers, especially after they enhanced them in the 30s, and adding the suspicious armor plates. And another interesting tidbit about the early ships of this class is that the gun turrets were designed for dual-purpose fire. The 8-inch guns could elevate to 70 degrees, which is like almost like this into the air. And they did get used as dual-purpose guns. The idea at the time was that the bombing would be done from a horizontal position and as well as torpedo bombing. And so such heavy guns would be effective against horizontal bombing. The problem is that the Swedish had to go and invent dive bombing in the 30s, which dive bombing was a big problem, especially for the British anti-aircraft philosophy, and caused a bunch of problems. So during the design of these class, they discuss a triple gun turret, but
which class are we on? Sorry,
we're still in the Londons.
Still on the Londons. Okay.
But like they start discussing triple turrets, but they decide that it's not feasible at this time. They're too large, essentially. And they designed the York class, which is Exeter. So we can take a look at Exeter now if we want to. And so basically, they wanted to build a smaller ship with 8-inch guns, and they built a York, and then they built Exeter. York has a very interesting bridge to it. It's basically like it's even more of a box than this is. Like it's literally slab-sided, and it looks like a Nagara class bridge structure. It's just a box with some jutting edges on it. It's really weird.
So from which year would you say British started to love boxes on their ship design?
The boxes pretty much start with the emeralds, okay. And they continue on, and they only get worse over time. I don't like the look of the Queen Anne's Mansion and the box structures, but that's just me. Some people really like them, and they seemed to do well in service because they kept them and they kept on building them. The thing that's interesting about the York class, if I remember right, it's the Yorks. They are the first British cruisers to actually experience wind tunnel testing. So they actually stick this thing in like an airplane wind tunnel. Let's stick a model of it in an airplane wind tunnel and see what airflow is over the ship from different directions.
With the intended design of increasing speed, I guess.
No, with the intent of making things more comfortable for the bridge crew, as well as for smoke. So they would stick like fake smoke generators in the funnels and see where the smoke would go, like what sort of aerodynamic problems there had. And so from after this design, they stick all of the cruiser designs in a wind tunnel. And you can see like in the Leanders, the funnels are almost aerodynamically shaped.
I see. Okay.
And it's very interesting in that regard. And so the York and the Exeter are the last heavy cruisers that Britain builds. They do discuss heavy cruisers later on. And basically, these are kind of their smaller second-class heavy cruisers.
One thing I would ask you, and I just realized, is when you look at Devonshire, not London, but when you look at Devonshire, there's a clear absence of any airplane facilities, is there?
Yeah.
At least on what I can see.
So a lot of these cruisers, they wanted to get aircraft facilities into them, and they did have them for a little bit, catapults, but they found that it just didn't really work, and it was very heavy.
Because when you look at Devonshire and switch to London, London actually has her airplane facility because she has like a midship.
Yeah.
No, wait, is it? No.
Yeah, those are hangars right there. So
I see.
so they have cranes for seaplanes, basically.
Okay.
And so so essentially they want to have they want to have airplane facilities, but they just can't get it to fit and work. And so they just do it. The Yorks do have it a little bit. They found that they really wanted it to make up for losing a gun, but again, it doesn't really work, and so they have to get rid of it.
Do we have any pictures of Exeter? By any
I
chance?
think we do. So this is Exeter as built. So it changes up a little bit. They change the bridge structure. And essentially the key thing is with the county class, you have a flush deck design. They decided to step the deck to save weight on the York class. And the whole idea is basically to take a county and make it like 8,000 tons rather than 10,000.
Okay.
To make it just cheaper. Because at this time, there isn't a maximum amount of cruisers they can build. But they need to save money because it's late 1920s and there's not a very much money going around in Britain for things that are not necessary.
I love the fact that on the picture you could actually see, was it 7? Yeah, no, it was this one. You could actually see the floatplanes, and it actually takes a massive part of the ship on the elevation that the plane has.
And that's a lot of weight up high in the ship, which is not
I was about
good.
to say, it makes it a bit more top heavy, but like the center of gravity must have been a little bit...
Right. And so that was a lot of the problems. Plus the catapults for these were heavy catapults, so it was not great. Exeter did get refitted after River Plate. So this picture here is basically how she would have fought the Graf Spee. And then what we have in game is what she would look like during the Battle of Java Sea in 1942. Cheshire did not exist. Cheshire is basically a hypothetical design, but I'll get to those ships later. And so the point of these ships is basically just lighter. The Exeter also had better magazine protections, and it had a slightly new funnel arrangement and the new bridge design. So there was a conference that they tried to do more arms limitations in 1927, which basically caused a delay in shipbuilding for a year. And so they thought they were going to have the split between light and heavy cruisers during this conference settled, but it didn't happen. Basically because, as Norman Friedman writes, basically the U.S. Navy representatives to the Geneva Conference of 1927 nuked it, and basically just kept on making like decisions that were just really weird and completely backwards to what they would say one day to the next, in order to just keep people confused and make sure the conference didn't work. And this angered the American public, but got the U.S. Navy what it wanted, which was more heavy cruisers. And essentially, so following this conference in the 1928-1929 period, we have the Surrey class designed. And the Surrey class was actually planned to be built, but got canceled. Basically, they cut down the aft quarterdeck on a county class cruiser. They also got rid of some of the engineering space and then added a bunch of armor everywhere. So there's more deck armor, there's a little bit more belt armor, and they just wanted a better, more protected county class cruiser. I don't have any pictures for this, I'm sorry. But there were a few of them ordered, but they got canceled almost immediately because the government's changed again, and the new government did not want to build them and spend the money on it. So essentially, but at this time they're getting intelligence from Japan that they're going to be building crazy cruisers with 8-inch guns, which Japan never built any cruisers with that, and 20 torpedoes. They were building the Miyoko class at the time, which was 10 8-inch guns and 16 torpedoes. But their intelligence from the Far East was not very reliable at this time. And so there were a few designs for the Surrey class with absurd amounts of torpedoes, but none of them were accepted or even really buffed. The Kitakamis were much later on. So the torpedo change to Kitakami happened in the 30s, several years later. The Kitakamis did have 40 torpedoes, but that happens in the late 30s. That's not at this point in time. And so also during this time, they established the base at Singapore. So and which also allows them to cut how much range they need in their ships, which means they can build smaller ships because they can refuel at Singapore. And of course, nobody would ever be able to take Singapore, right? Moving on. And so the emphasis on the Surreys was greater protection. And so I won't make you play a Surrey so we can move on. But essentially, it's just a heavier county class cruiser or denser county class cruiser. And so the upcoming 1930 treaty happens. So the Surreys get canceled, and the 1930 treaty happens. They already want to split the designation of cruiser in between light cruisers and heavy cruisers, and that was basically that's their goal for the 1930 London Treaty, which they call. And most importantly, at the 1930 treaty, they do not allow naval representatives for any nation at the treaty. They do allow naval advisors, but the Navy delegates are not allowed, so that the Americans cannot nuke the conference again and get what they want, which is a very interesting thing. But it's just how politics works in this sort of time period. And the most important thing that comes out for cruisers in the 1930 treaty is that heavy cruisers are limited. And the split basically goes as such. Any cruiser that is armed with a weapon that is smaller than 155 millimeters is a light cruiser. Doesn't matter what tonnage it is, doesn't matter what armor it has, just gun armament. And anything above 155 millimeters is a heavy cruiser, full stop. That's what the definition is. And so it's only armament, has nothing to do with armor, has nothing to do with tonnage. And so so what happens is since 8-inch guns are heavier than 6-inch guns, ships that are heavy cruisers tend to be less armored than what light cruisers are. Nice.
That's a knife and a half.
And so, at least whenever they're built to the maximum limit, a light cruiser is usually going to be more protected than a heavy cruiser is at this time. The British wanted to limit light cruisers to 8,000 tons. They didn't get that. And so everybody starts building 10,000 ton light cruisers after this. Why were there no 7-inch guns? There were 7-inch guns proposed for the British Navy, but they never got through anywhere. And the Russians used a lot of 7-inch guns. They're the 180 millimeter guns. Basically, the idea was that there was not enough difference between a 7-inch gun and a 6-inch gun to merit the extra weight and cost compared to an 8-inch gun. So, when it comes to plating thicknesses of different ships, majority of that is just balancing. In real life, most Royal Navy ships had a 38 millimeter plate for the bow, and so that was just the Royal Navy standard. It's 1.5 inches of armor, but we adjust platings for the balance factor. The Hawkins class had 7.5-inch guns. The Kirov class had 7-inch guns. So you had several Kirov classes as well as the Molotov subclass. So you have Kirov, you have Molotov. There's a few other Russian cruisers as well, and there are actually quite a lot of Russian cruisers out there, but like compared to what you would think. And they were actually surprisingly good ships. The guns were horrible. The guns were absolutely awful, but the ships themselves were actually pretty good seakeeping wise, which is something I found surprising. Anyway, we're not talking about Russian cruisers. We're talking about British cruisers. Even though the British did design some cruisers for Russia at some point, but we're not going to talk about those because I don't have time. So after the 1930 treaty, Britain's again thinking we need 70 cruisers. We have a limit on how many total displacement they have. If I remember right, it was 200,000 tons. And so they had to take that and get 70 cruisers out of it. And so they basically get into, sorry.
If you wanna, if you.
I need a drink real quick. My voice is gone.
Yeah, Lane's voice is gone. And meanwhile, my DD decided to turn away from chasing that Fubuki, which makes me alone here and dodging torpedoes.
Yeah. Moving on. After the 1930 treaty, they need to make small cruisers to get to the number of cruisers that they need. So they design the Leander class. And so the Leanders are meant to be small, kind of second class trade protection cruisers and fleet protection cruisers for anti-destroyer work. That's a
Leander.
Yeah, that is a Leander class. This is HMS Achilles, not HMAS Achilles. That happens later. And so the point of the Leanders was basically to make a small ship that is capable of doing trade protection work and basically capable of fighting other light cruisers. They reused the twin gun design from the Enterprise with some enhancements. And these ships are surprisingly well armored for how small they are. They have 3.5 inches of armor, which is roughly, if I remember right, that's roughly 90 millimeters of belt armor. Achilles ended up with the New Zealand. The HMAS Leanders are all amphibians, but Achilles and Ajax end up with the New Zealand Navy, but that is later on. At first, it's just HMS. But these are like new light cruisers. So they wanted to Ajax and Achilles are both Leander class, and I'll get onto them in a little bit. But basically, these are distinguished by basically an entirely new design. They scrapped the old light cruiser designs, and they want to start from the ground up. They keep the trawler bow as noticed up front. They kind of use the Exeter style bridge with some improvements, and most notably, they trunk all of the funnels into one single funnel for the Leanders. That allows them to put an aircraft catapult behind it. And the thing is that they also introduced is a unit machinery layout, which means that they have basically a setup where each propeller has its own like unit of rooms for its boilers and engines.
Oh, so it basically helped with damage control if one.
In theory.
Okay.
So the idea is that you would knock out a single propeller rather than an entire set of propellers. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Leander's displacement is around 7.1 thousand, or it's about 7,150 tons, more or less. Mm-hmm. Of course, it increases over time. They get up into the 8,000s later on. HMS Achilles was British. Later, it gets into the New Zealand Navy. but we'll get to that in a minute.
So just one question that I need to clarify in my own head, and I see the question in chat regarding displacement.
Yep.
Is the displacement the pure effective weight of a ship?
It's
If you would put it on a scale, would it
no.
Okay.
So essentially, it is the best way to measure the weight of a ship. It is so displacement is the measurement of how many tons of water gets moved out of the way by the ship.
Oh, so it's volumetric.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's more of a measure of volume moved by the ship.
So you would have the design of the ship itself, and engineers could calculate the displacement before the ship even existed.
Yeah.
Oh.
So basically whenever they're able to estimate like a turret weighs 150 tons or and then they can just kind of Lego piece all these bits together and figure out like almost to around about 100 tons, give or take, what the ship is going to weigh.
That is okay. That is genius, actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of these ships tend to end up being underweight when they come out. Some of them are overweight, especially in the county class, because they have problems getting the turrets to be the proper weight. Because originally they get told the turrets are going to be 140 tons, so they guess 150 tons when building it, and then the turrets end up being 180 tons, and they're like, "Oh God, we have to change something," and there's a whole bunch of changes that go on into these classes.
It was a lot of guesstimate, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
So. And so the Leanders come out, and they're surprisingly good ships. They build 8 of them, and so that is Exeter post refit.
Sorry, my bad.
And then this is HMS Achilles.
The trick I have is that I just put a picture while I go into battle, so you guys don't have to look at the queue time, essentially. Or the
That's a good idea.
So sorry if I miss if I missed the picture.
Yeah, and so the defining moment for the Leander class cruisers is the Battle of River Plate. So this is the battle against the Admiral Graf Spee, and so they have Ajax or Ajax, depending on how you pronounce it. Most people say Ajax, and you have Achilles, both in Royal Navy service at this time, and you also have Exeter with them. In the battle, the Exeter deals like the fatal blow to Admiral Graf Spee, but gets basically knocked out in terms of combat effectiveness. Basically, gets knocked out pretty early on, and most of like the visible damage to Graf Spee is done by Ajax and Achilles.
Oh, I see. So essentially, it was 2 Leander class on Exeter.
Yeah.
So an Exeter class that basically plinks the Graf Spee. Exeter put the damaging blow that either slowed down or forced it to retreat, and then essentially the 2 Leanders just kept on firing until the ship was run away.
Yeah. So all 3 of the ships were faster than the Graf Spee at this point, because Graf Spee had been out and about for a long time. Her hull was fouled. Her engines were not in good condition. But you basically end up with these 2 ships fighting the Admiral Graf Spee. The Admiral Graf Spee thinks that it's just 2 destroyers and a light cruiser, but it ends up being 2 light cruisers and a heavy cruiser. And basically the idea is that the Exeter goes off in one way and the 2 Leanders go off in another way to kind of pincer and confuse the Admiral Graf Spee. And the Leander class cruisers, people say that, oh, their guns could not penetrate Admiral Graf Spee's armor, which is probably true, but that doesn't matter. You don't have to penetrate the armor to kill a ship in terms of combat ability. And so these ships
still knock out turrets. You can still.
Yeah, they were so they were firing so quickly and so much ammunition that they literally warp the guns in Ajax and Achilles. They warp and basically melt the guns and have to have them replaced after the battle.
How many rounds were fired?
It was in the several hundreds per gun. So you have basically you have over 800 per ship, or per light or for Ajax and Achilles each. And so I would say that they do an astounding job at the Battle of the River Plate. They do exactly what they're meant to do, and so
Because they were technically outgunned by Gatsby, it's just superior calibers.
yeah, like especially the Exeter was probably a slightly like less, or was less powerful than Admiral Grashbay, but combined they were more powerful. In theory, none of these ships really should have been fighting this ship, but it was just what the British had, and so they went with it. There was a County class in the area, but she was busy restocking at the Falkland Islands, and so she was not able to come. That was HMS Cumberland, and so the Leanders do very well, but they're not able to completely chase the Admiral Grashbay, because otherwise they would abandon the Exeter, which was not in a very good state at this point in time, and so they came back to help out as much as they could. And that's sort of the defining moment for these ships, but they see service everywhere. And there is a subclass of Leander-class cruisers called the Amphion class. The easiest way you tell a ship is Amphion class instead of Leander class is that they had to split, or they split the unit machinery up to where you have 2 smokestacks rather than 1. And all of the Amphion class end up in the service of the Australian Navy. And so you have HMAS Perth, as well as HMAS Sydney, and I think it's HMS Hobart.
Hobart.
Yeah, I think that's the 3. I'm probably wrong on that.
That's what I know about the British game against destroyers. Short fuse AP is just absolutely ruthless.
Yeah. And so those 3 all end up in the Australian service, and they split up the machinery space. So the main weakness of this design, of the unit machinery as used in the Leanders as well as the Dido class, was that you could fall prey to what's called asymmetric flooding. Basically, there were big spaces behind the rearmost unit on each side of the engines, and basically, if you take one torpedo to one of those sides, the flooding would be such that the ship would basically capsize. So it was very much a weak spot and a weak point in the design that they wanted to fix with the Amphions a little bit. And so basically what would happen would be you would get flooding on one side of the ship, and the other side of the ship would be buoyant, and so it would be have more weight on one side and then buoyancy on the other side, and it would just capsize the ship, and that was not a good time. So you had to very quickly counter flood to counter it, or you would be underwater very quickly. So you had to take care of that. And that was basically the main weakness of this ship. And so moving on from this ship is another series of light cruisers. They had 4 of them. It was the Arethusa class, which is kind of basically a Leander with 1 less gun. So you have 6-inch guns and twin turrets. We don't have the Arethusa in game, but I think I have a picture of, that's Achilles. No, that's a town. We'll get there. Let's see. Where is 15? So this is HMS Aurora. This is what a Arethusa class looks like. They're basically like even 3rd class trade protection cruisers.
I see. So they do have a lot of similarity, that is front-wise.
Yeah, they weigh around 5,500 tons. So they're even smaller, and basically they're just there to replace some of the C-class cruisers, was the idea. And so they're like the intermediate cruiser, and it's just basically their purpose is to boost numbers. They end up doing pretty well in service. Aurora ends up in the service of ends up in the Far East service underneath another country as the Huanghe. And so, and Huanghe is a premium on PC, so we might see it at some point, but we do not have it in Legends yet.
Okay.
So,
That's very interesting.
and that's the Arethusa class. They serve pretty well throughout the war, especially against destroyers. As well as there's one ship of the class named Penelope, also known as HMS Pepperpot.
That's a nice name, actually.
Because of this photo, which is essentially like battle damage she took in a night battle, if I remember right, and basically got shot up by a bunch of gunboats and destroyers, and was just riddled with bullet holes, and she kind of looked like a pepper pot. And so,
She got the surname after this event, essentially.
yeah, because the name was Penelope, and it kind of fit with it. So, so yeah, that was the Leanders and the Amphions. And these are all like early to mid 1930s cruisers. In the 31 and 32, they start designing triple turrets. They know that they need to start working on triple turrets. Everybody else is working on triple turrets or already have them in service, and they start working on it. Vickers Armstrong comes up with a design that's accepted in late 1932 and early 33. And they decide to develop a cruiser around this turret. And so the Town class is born. And the first one is Southampton. And they develop a very large light cruiser, which has 12 6-inch guns and triple turrets. And the funny image about these ships is, let me find the ice picture, is that the middle gun of the triple turret is backwards of the other two guns. This serves three main purposes. And the first one is that it clears the blast of the outside guns from the inside gun. And so I'll answer that question, Fox, in just a minute. So it clears the blast so that there's no interference between the shells of the guns. It allows for faster loading because there's more room for the middle gun, the crew, because they're behind the other two gun crews. So you can reload a little bit more comfortably, a little bit faster. It also saves space and weight in terms of the turret, so the triple turret can be smaller while having more of a gap between the guns. And that's the reason that you have this weird design. You can see it on Belfast, the museum ship.
I'll show it on the port afterwards.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry about the Leander gameplay, which is starting to be a little bit long here, but it's, that game is stretching out. I'm just trying to see if I can get a Kraken before the game ends. Just goes on. That's about it.
So in the meantime, I'll answer Fox's question. So double, triple, or quad turret have what advantages in terms of capability? I mean, the clear advantage is just in the number of guns you have per turret. And so a triple tends to be much heavier than a twin, but a quad does not tend to be much heavier than a triple. But they take more room. Kraken. Robin is printing out the Krakens to stream. And then and basically you can have a greater density of fire with a quadruple turret, but it's more complicated. And so there's multiple different theories. Generally speaking, the triples were more or less the best turret designs throughout the war, although the French quadruple turrets were pretty good. The British quadruple turrets were not so good. And the twins in general are reliable, but they are not as efficient in terms of how many turrets you need to get a number of guns.
No, that's not the one with the...
What are you looking for?
The one with the ice on
14
the guns. Yeah, here we go. Thank you.
So
I should ask you maybe because I don't know the picture.
yeah, I've got it written down.
So now you can see like the layout of the...
Yeah. So if you look at the top, you'll see it in terms of the cuts in the turret. And so basically, so like a triple turret is generally the most efficient design over time. Also, but the thing is, if you lose a turret with a triple or a quad turret, you lose more of your firepower total. So that's sort of the trade-off for it. So let's move on. So the town class, the original town class are built to about 9,060 tons. And so this is the Belfast and Edinburgh are a later town class. And so let's see if we got a picture. That's Belfast damage. So this is Gloucester. No, this is Newcastle. This is HMS Newcastle, which is one of the earlier town class cruisers. You can see it's got more of a rounded bridge to it, which is kind of more the defining feature of some of the earlier town class. And these are big ships. They have a lot of fuel, a lot of range ability, and also like you have 12 6-inch guns, which is a lot of firepower for Britain. Of course, the Mogamis have 15 guns at this point in time, and the Birkeling class is 15 guns. But there are trade-offs. This ship is more heavily armored than pretty much both of those class, and is much more seaworthy than especially the Mogamis. And so the thing with these ships is that they're just very large, and it is the first instance of the stream of a class of ship that was going to be called the Minotaur class.
Oh boy, here we go. Hold that thought just a second. I just want to make sure that because Mr. Christian Tikana is in the chat, and it's been a few times that he told me that my microphone wasn't coming through, which is not a massive deal because I'm not the one talking here. But can you guys hear me correctly? If not, I'll look into what's going on with it.
Yep.
Other than that, if you guys are hearing me fine, I'll just keep it as it is and just try to speak closer to the microphone, basically.
Yep.
Sounds good. You hear us? Okay. Let me close this
just
and go back to Minotaur class.
Yeah. So, so the original name for the first town class cruiser was going to be Minotaur. They changed it to Southampton. So, no Minotaur yet. We'll get there.
Eventually.
And basically one of the key defining features of this class was the change to switch edge 6-inch guns for a large cruiser. Part of the reasoning of this is that they do a series of exercises in the 30s comparing 8-inch guns versus 6-inch guns, and in terms of like and length of engagement. They found that 8-inch guns have an advantage in the first salvo or two. So if they land a hit in the first salvo or two, an 8-inch gun cruiser is better. But the longer an engagement goes, 6-inch gun cruisers can do more damage.
Okay.
Because at the ranges that they're going to be fighting at, no cruiser has the armor to resist a 6-inch gun that the British think that they're going to be fighting at, and no cruiser has the ability to resist an 8-inch gun. 8-inch guns do more damage per hit, but the rate of fire of a 6-inch gun over time will give it a huge advantage in terms of hit rate. And so that's part of the reasoning for sticking with the 6-inch. And so and this is the idea going into the town class cruisers and later cruisers. Robin is going to share a straw poll here. So at this point in the stream, we want to shout out this is meant to be a series of streams, and so this straw poll is going to decide what kind of ships we cover next. So next time we have the option of doing French battleships, Japanese aircraft carriers, or United States destroyers. And so answer in that straw poll, and you will be able to kind of pick what I do next. So going on, we'll do the German battleships for a more special period, I think.
The stream is far from being over. I just thought we could refresh for people who will join in midstream if you want to vote for the next one.
They built a bunch of town class cruisers. They built 8 of the standard 9,000 ton cruisers, and then they decide for the last 2 of them, they're going to go for 10,000 tons. And so that is Belfast and Edinburgh. And so the original idea was we're just going to make a larger town class cruisers with quadruple turrets.
Oh.
Because they had gotten a quadruple turret design figured out, and they were determined that they could probably get it to work in a slightly larger hull, and they were thinking that with 1,000 tons, they could just get it to work.
And that's the interpretation of what Plymouth is on PC.
Yes.
Okay.
So on PC, Plymouth is basically this design. They don't end up going for it. they decided instead to increase basically the armor protection and the size and the accommodation in the ship, because these were pretty cramped, very tight
I
ships.
can imagine servicing this would be pretty intense for sure.
Yeah.
A quad gun turret.
So
Sorry, that's the wrong one.
So Plymouth is based off of one of the designs for the Belfast and Edinburgh, but it was never built. And so the original proposal was with 4 quadruple guns, but they went with triples because they knew triples would work, and they knew it would be fine for firing over each other and that sort of thing, because they were also decreasing the amount of space between the turrets. So, and that was the idea for the Belfast and Edinburgh. And these are the biggest cruisers that the Britain built, and they're huge. HMS Belfast, as shown off by Robin here, is the last surviving British ship from World War II. Cavalier cruiser, yeah. Large ship, and Belfast is moored in London, and I believe they're opening soonish, and so that's the idea. So after Belfast and Edinburgh, we're going to get to one of the classes that we don't have any model for. My favorite looking British cruiser is the Dido class.
Okay, so it is pronounced Dido or Dido?
Yes.
Okay. Fine. I'll start off with Dido.
Yeah. So this is the Dido class cruiser HMS Hermione, and basically the defining feature of this gun is guns. It's got 10 5.25 inch guns, and it's a small ship. And so that's the core of the design. I think that they're lovely looking cruisers, especially from the front. But hopefully we'll see them at some point, but at this time there's no plans for them. And so these are basically, they want to take an Arethusa hull and and then make it more capable. And that's the core design principle of it. So it's a little bit larger than an Arethusa, but the main purpose is for recon, screening, and flotilla support, so like destroyer support. Originally, they looked at a design that was going to be 4.7 inch guns, so 120 millimeter guns, and that design becomes the tribal class destroyers. So the tribal class destroyers come out of the Dido's design cycle, and tribal class is what Cossack is. And so the idea with these is they want to replace the C and D class cruisers, which are getting pretty old by this point, and they have several armament decisions over time. They want to have at some point 6 single 152 millimeter guns. Which would be really interesting to see, but or 4.7 inch guns, and eventually the Ordnance Bureau decides on the 5 twin 5.25 inch gun, which becomes problematic. Would I say the Didos were destroyer leaders like Atlanta? Yes, they were more destroyer leader than they were anti-aircraft cruiser. Basically, if the British were going to make an anti-aircraft cruiser, they have a better gun for it than the 5.25 inch already. They had the 4.5 inch gun, which is what the Daring class cruisers used, and they had that ready. But they decided against it because they wanted greater power against destroyers. So they went with the 133/34 millimeter gun, the 5.25 inch. So they're not just AA cruisers. They're meant to take part in battle against destroyers, and did so pretty well. As you've noticed, there's kind of a trend at this time to name British cruisers after Greek names. Not entirely sure why. Some of these names also don't make too much sense. But there are you have the Didos, the Hermione, I believe, is a Greek name. You have Calypso, Danae is a Greek name. but they're just Greek mythology names. So that's kind of the Dido class. Hopefully we'll see them at some point, but I guess at this point we should mention, stick around to the end of the stream because we will have something special for you guys at the end of the stream. And we'll get there soon-ish because we're on to the Fiji class next.
All right. Yeah. Let me try to wrap this up. The
I have a little bit more to say about the Didos, I guess. So the Dido class have problems getting their guns. And so a lot of them end up missing some of their guns and having them replaced with just regular 4-inch twin guns. And so because basically the 5.25-inch gun gets adopted fairly late before the war, and they need to get them into service, and they can't make enough 5.25-inch guns. So it's like rough.
How do we deal with this situation?
Yeah, and so they replace a few of the guns with them. Dido ends up with all of her guns. Hermione ends up with all of her guns. That's what most of them do not end up with all the guns. They make a surprising amount of Dido class. They make 16 of them. So they're the second most produced British cruiser of that we're covering, at least. So we'll. And so, but after the Didos, let's actually see if we have any questions. Does anybody have any questions so far about cruisers that we've covered yet? So we've been through the Towns, the Leanders, Arethuses, Didos.
That was deserved. All right, that was the goal essentially. Let's move on. So
some of the KGVs, I believe, took some of the guns from the Didos because the KGVs had more priority. So, yeah. So, and then on to Fiji. So Fiji is a Crown Colony class cruiser. Let me get a picture of one. So this is Jamaica, which is one of the early Fijis. And early guys, so you see 4 turrets here. And then later on, they lose one of the turrets. This is HMS Ceylon, which is now known, or Ceylon, it was a colony at the time. It's now called Sri Lanka. That's what Ceylon is. And all of these were named after various colonies of the Crown. So you have Fiji, Jamaica, Ceylon, try to think of some others. But anyhow, basically the idea of this is fit the Town class cruiser, the 9,000 ton Town class cruiser, into 8,000 tons. So they want to squeeze as much capability into a tiny ship as possible, and it's basically an engineering miracle that it actually works.
Oh, so what they do is that they have these holes of all the Town classes.
No, they redesign the Town class.
They don't reuse the holes. They redesign them to fit a different armament and make them lighter.
Yeah, or the same armament, but just make them lighter and smaller.
Understood.
So then that was the idea. They wanted to they wanted to save weight so that they'd make more. So these ships, the original plan was to have them with 3 quadruple gun turrets, but again, they don't decide to do that and just stick with the triple turrets. I guess that's probably for manufacturing time. They could just keep making Town class turrets. And
which picture is it for the Fiji?
18 and 19.
18 and 19, I got you. Okay, let me just do this.
So, and they succeed pretty well. I think that these ships are basically an engineering miracle, considering how much capability they have. They have torpedoes, they have anti-aircraft armament, not great ones, but they do. And they have 12 guns, 12 at 6-inch guns at first. But later on, they find that they add in radar, they add in more anti-aircraft as time goes on. They have to remove one of the turrets.
Okay.
And so
the ship is getting overweight.
Yeah, all of the Fijis have one of the turrets removed during service.
Okay.
Well, unless they got sunk. Fiji got sunk before she lost her turret. And so, and they also have, they're such a light ship that they even have some problems with drift and wind whenever they're turning. Basically, they would get pushed around by the wind, and but they were pretty, like, they did a lot of service and did surprisingly well. So they also had decent armor, not as much as a town class, but more than what you would expect. And they had aircraft capabilities, because you can see the hangars next to the front funnel.
Realistically, on these, so 152 should be
6 inch.
6 inch. What was the realistic rate of fire of these guns? As, like, let's say just pure, like,
If you were
how
going,
many seconds could one turret
If you-
cycle the?
yeah, if you were going really, really, really hard, you could, in theory, achieve a rate of fire of 12 rounds a minute.
That's gonna
That's
be
like-
your 5 second.
5-ish seconds.
5-ish seconds.
More realistically, you're looking at 6 or 7 seconds maximum rate of fire, and that would be after you found the range. You wouldn't be just full
No,
bore
of course.
going.
You have to range it first and then just let it rip, essentially.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm pushing in like this, but I am doing it.
So that's the and that's the idea. So a lot of these ships lose their basically all the British cruisers except for Belfast lose one of their turrets, or all the British Town class and Fiji class cruisers lose one of their turrets except for Belfast, because Belfast gets damaged. That's number 12. Gets damaged by a mine, a German mine, that basically breaks her keel and makes her and ruins all of her engineering spaces and makes her have to get a complete rebuild and bulging. So she has the reserve buoyancy thanks to extra torpedo bulges to keep her turret throughout her service. And so the Belfast we have in game is the 1954 refit Belfast, where she lost her torpedoes, but gained in terms of radar and other facilities. And so the Fiji class do pretty well in service, and they fight throughout the war, and there's not very many complaints. They serve after the war in various Commonwealth navies. One of them goes to Canada. I can't remember which one that is, but and then you also have a development and improved Fiji class. It's the second Minotaur class. And so you have, and there are 3 ships of that. There's Swiftsure, I can't remember one of them, and then you have Swiftsure Minotaur, which then gets put into the service of the Canadian Navy as HMCS Ontario, and they do pretty well. But they're realistically, the Swiftsures are not in service really for World War II. They get commissioned in 1945, so that's later. There's different armor between Belfast and Edinburgh. Is that real? Not really, no. That's just gameplay balance purposes. If Belfast had Edinburgh's armor at tier 6, should be completely broken. So yeah, that's the Swiftsure, the Minotaur class. The main improvement for these classes is that they were built around their radar systems, and so it's all integrated and planned to work together, and it does, and these ships do pretty well. And so the last real ships that the Royal Navy builds as cruisers are the Tiger class. So they take 3 of the Swiftsure class hulls, redesign them, and put basically an auto-loading 6-inch gun turrets on either end, and new anti-aircraft firepower, which are 3-inch guns, so 76 millimeter guns, and that ship is, well, this is HMCS Ontario, Swiftsure class, and then this is HMS Tiger. Tiger serves into the 70s. She was just released on PC, so hopefully we'll see her at some point. There's no plans.
There's no plans for it. Let's make it clear.
Yeah, there are no plans for Tiger, but I hope to see her soon.
We get all excited about it.
Yeah, because Tiger is a very good-looking ship. Tiger sea service into the 70s. She's still around during the Falkland Wars, but she's in mothballs. They try to bring her out for the Falkland War, but basically the war was not going to stick around, and so she doesn't get brought out for it. And so basically there wasn't enough time to bring them online. And that's basically the end of the cruisers that were built for the Royal Navy. And so, of course, there is the infamous Royal Majesty's machine gun that is the Minotaur on PC, which was a design in 1947. Basically, they wanted to take all these auto-loading turrets and make a anti-aircraft light cruiser. And you guys have been asking intently, and I am happy to say that there is a possibility to see Minotaur this year.
I think it's more than a possibility. Oh, this year?
Yes.
Oh, my bad.
There is a possibility this year that we will see Minotaur. So that's some good news for you guys. And so we know you guys have been anticipating it ever since the development director Q&A, but we don't know what it'll look like, how it will come, and so. But there's a possibility we'll see it. And I've probably said more than I should have.
That's pretty decent because the ship got confirmed by our Kirill
Yep.
Peskov, our development director. It was maybe around a year and a half ago now that development Q&A.
Yeah, it was almost a year now because that was for anniversary. So, but yeah, as Phil said, you could say that, and that's all we got. So, yes, Jackal, your question. Is the Fiji AA supposed to get worse when you upgrade to Fiji Hull B? The 105mm is no longer counts as AA. And so basically, I believe that what you're talking about is basically a bug. So right now, like not all of the anti-aircraft armament gets rendered properly in the stats lowdown. Like you'll notice it on King George V is the easiest example. Basically, the 5.25-inch guns aren't listed. They are working. So you know that those large caliber AA guns are working by basically, is there black puffs of smoke in the air? And so it should be working. It's just probably just a UI thing that we're working on. And so that is not the only announcement. Stick around for the end of the stream. And so one of the things I want to get around is the British had this idea of you need 70 cruisers for the Empire. I'll get that in a second. We need 70 cruisers for the Empire. Did they actually achieve that, realistically speaking, throughout the service? And so we look at how many cruisers were built. We had 28 C-class cruisers. We had 8 D-class cruisers. We had 2 E-class cruisers. 13 county-class cruisers.
Okay.
We had
the county class, remember me again, is the
London.
The Londons, okay.
And the other ones. And then we had 2 York class. We had 8 Leanders and Amphions, 4 Arethuses, 10 Towns, 16 Didos, and 11 Fijis, 3 Swiftsures, and 3 Tigers. And so that adds up to a total of 108 cruisers.
They went over it big time.
They went over the 70 number big time. However, to be fair, not all of these ships were actually around in World War II. So what is their World War II number-ish? And that is, realistically speaking, 87 for World War II. Because basically half the C-class gets scrapped in the 30s, and Tiger and Swiftsures are not really in service for World War II. And so that was the plan. The Minotaur was planned to be an AA cruiser. You basically stick a bunch of radar-guided, automatic 6-inch guns in a similar version to Worcester, but they just didn't have the money for it, so it didn't get done. And I saw a question there, what about the flat sterns on British cruisers? Especially the Fijis, is where you'll notice it in Albemarle. Albemarle, by the way, whenever they get into World War II, they start designing new heavy cruisers, but they decide to go against that in reality. The idea was that new heavy cruisers would make better use of radar because radar could pick up the shell splashes from an 8-inch gun very reliably. Basically the cost would be too high. You could get one Vanguard for 2 of those cruisers. So they went with one Vanguard, understandably. And that's why that didn't happen. But the reason for the flat stern on the Fiji class cruisers is basically it makes for high speed, it makes it more efficient. So essentially you get, the wake will push against the ship and give you some extra speed for having that flat stern at high speed. At medium speeds, it's not very good, but it allowed the Fiji class to get to their design speed with less engine power, which allowed them to save weight. It was tested on a mine-laying cruiser, the Adventure, in the 20s. So as early as the 20s, they're thinking about doing this flat stern thing. And they even designed it for the N3 and G3 class capital ships.
Oh,
and so they were to be built with flat sterns, but they decided against it because for various reasons, mostly because low speed running doesn't work very well with a transom stern. But they reappear for Fijis for efficiency purposes.
I see. Okay. Well, Fiji it is.
Yep. And now that's all I had to cover. I think we actually did it in 2 hours.
We did it in 2 hours, which is impressive.
Whoa! Took me
I
a
still
long.
have some ships to play. I haven't played the Story, haven't played the Albemarle, haven't played the Edinburgh. So what we could do is maybe play a couple more games. And if you guys have any questions to Princeblip, to ask him right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now it's time for Q&A. I think so. We can do some questions.
We still have like a good half an hour.
I'll close
we can just chill and
the Book of Wisdom.
Questions.
And grab a drink real quick.
Yeah, you can catch your breath. That was 2 hours of intense information. One question I would have though, as like an overall summary.
Yeah.
If you had to explain the history of British cruisers from, let's say, the 30s to the 50s,
mm-hmm.
in one sentence or one metaphor, what would it be? You can take your time. It's a hard question, maybe. But if you could create an allegory or metaphor around the entire history of British cruisers in like 1, 2 USPs or just a theory or just anything, even a joke can work. Like British cruiser history. This.
I would say. Finding ingenious solutions to somewhat innocuous problems.
Oh, somebody write that down, please. Finding ingenious. Go again.
Ingenious solutions to somewhat innocuous problems.
Okay, so here we go. Essentially, being very good at engineers on very rough.
Being very clever about solving problems that you wouldn't think about, or you wouldn't expect to be a problem.
What is problems?
So I saw a question here. What is Cheshire? So Cheshire, it's one of the giveaway ships in our Discord giveaway. Make sure you go to Discord and react to the announcement to get involved in that. Cheshire is mostly made up by us. Going to be fully honest there. Whenever the British were designing heavy cruisers at the beginning of World War II, Churchill pushed for a cruiser armed with 234 millimeter guns, or 9.2 inch guns. And Churchill had this idea of like this super heavy cruiser and was pushing for one armed with 12 of those guns. Wow. So we took basically some of the design work that came out of that and made a ship that looked like that, but did it in a York style. And basically, so you have a York style cruiser with the 9.2 inch guns. And that's what Cheshire is. It's based off of the Admiralty designs, but it is not an Admiralty design. And so Drake is another one of our Admiralty designs. Drake, I believe, is a 1942 Admiralty design. So I did mention the Courageous class. I mentioned Furious, but I didn't talk about them. So they're more of a capital ship thing, in my opinion. So Drake is just one of the Admiralty class cruisers. And she's basically, she and Goliath are the super cruiser that Churchill wanted. Albemarle is the most likely Admiralty class cruiser to have been built. It's what the Navy wanted, the Royal Navy wanted more so in that design, but money didn't allow for it to be built. We did not talk about the Admiral class. Battle cruisers will be for a British battleship stream.
Yeah.
So-
I think it's difficult to mix battle cruisers with
Yeah.
cruisers and heavy cruisers because this is like a whole different world almost.
Mm-hmm.
To some extent.
Yeah, so what class was Edinburgh? Edinburgh is a town class cruiser, or the subclass for Edinburgh is the Edinburgh subclass or Belfast subclass, but it's just an enlarged town class cruiser.
Nice torpedo hit. I wasn't expecting to hit that jump out with a torpedo.
Did the British have plans for a large supercruiser with 305mm guns like the Alaska? Yes, they did. Basically, think of it as a really big Chesser. That'd be it's a very long, very big Chesser. It's basically like a renowned class with 12-inch guns. They did have a design for it, but that was it. Were they typically always overcrewed? Yes, they were almost always overcrewed, and they overcrewed and never enough space. After this battle, we will take the straw poll and see what the next class is. So, what do I know about HMS Delhi, the D class refitted with USN 5-inch guns? They liked the 5-inch 38 on Delhi, but they really didn't think that it was necessary. So they felt that they were almost too fast. They would move. I think it was like a bag in the wind was because the traverse weight was so absurd on them. So why did our Edinburgh get a 30mm bow? And why AP only for the whole line? So I answered the AP only question earlier. It mimics the effect of the historical common shell that the 6-inch gun had. Edinburgh gets a 30mm bow because that's just a balancing factor. So it helps her survive a little bit in battle if you're bow tanking. But if you're not bow tanking, you can get deleted very quickly. Historically, Edinburgh had a 38mm bow. Most British ships had them, but we don't use historical values for plating because plating is a gameplay feature function. So did Hood have a sister ship? Hood did not have a sister ship. Although she was supposed to have 3 sisters. The announcement was not the Minotaur possibility. So Hood is a battle cruiser, or even you could say a battleship. But she is not involved in this stream. How did they fare in the Arctic convoys? So I would say fairly well. All of these ships were designed to operate in the North Atlantic and such. And they did fairly well, as long as you got rid of the ice. I'll bring back the ice picture real quick. You can see how thick that ice builds up. If you let it build up, it will take your ship out. HMS Trinidad, which was one of the Fiji class cruisers, ended up having an ice problem with one of her torpedoes and torpedoed herself. And so they did pretty well. Sorry to repeat your question. Can you recommend a good book on British ships? So for this stream, I primarily used 2 books. One of them was D.K. Brown's Nelson to Vanguard, which also covers British cruisers. D.K. Brown is an excellent writer and also has a lot of knowledge about ship building. And so that's that's that. Another one I used is Norman Friedman's British Cruisers of World War II, I think it's called. And that is an excellent book that goes into detail about all these ships and the designs. And I want to make sure I get the name on that right. But yeah, Nelson to Vanguard is definitely a great introduction. Let me make sure I have it on my phone here. It's British Cruisers, 2 World Wars and After. So Jay McCarthy, your question about the 5.2-inch gun was a better AA gun. I said the opposite, or I meant to say the opposite. The 5.4-inch gun is a better AA gun than the 5.25-inch gun. The reason the 5.25-inch gun was chosen for the Didos was not because of its AA capabilities, but because of its surface fire capability. So HMS Tiger. Which HMS Tiger? The HMS Tiger 1959 was a Swiftsure class cruiser that was rebuilt into HMS Tiger, into the Tiger class. It was armed with 4 6-inch guns and 2 auto-loading turrets, basically as an anti-aircraft monster, and it was really good. So yes, for the Discord giveaway, you just need to react. We will be taking winners from the reactions.
I apologize about. I didn't realize the gameplay wasn't in full screen. Sorry about that, guys. Must have been a bit annoying.
So let's see. I saw one that was Liverpool was not the same class as Edinburgh, or was not the same subclass as Edinburgh. Liverpool was a town class cruiser, but Edinburgh is bigger.
Yes, Shima. Turn back towards me. Okay, she get out of my hydroacoustic range. But if you guys have been paying attention to the build I'm running on the Edinburgh,
let me see.
Surprise.
So if the British use English measurements, why do they use so many 4.5-inch and 5.5-inch guns rather than common 6 and 6 or 5 and 6-inch? They wanted to optimize their guns as much as they could in the middle caliber range, and so they jumped around a lot from different calibers, and they didn't care about standard sizes. They just wanted to figure out what would work best, and they kind of missed the mark, if you ask me. 5-inch was kind of the obvious choice. Could the weight of ice alone sink a ship? Yes, because ice will build up high in the ship, which puts weight high in the ship. And you can easily sink a ship and capsize it, basically, with the weight of ice. And yes, Royal Navy cruisers were instrumental in not just the hunt for Bismarck, but also patrolling for turpets leaving the port, as well as in they're crucial in the Mediterranean. Yeah.
Well, I think that game's over. So we can go back to port. It was a fun one.
Somebody asked to see your commander.
Yeah, I'll show it. I used kind of the same commanders for every single ships. I believe I alternated between Fraser and and I believe was Jellicoe, is it? Yes.
Yep. So
this is the build for Mr. Fraser.
So how do you react? React, you look at the announcement, and underneath the announcement, there's a little image, and it should be the World of Warships Legends logo. Click on that logo.
Yes.
And make sure that that logo is highlighted in white.
If you haven't been on the Discord, I think I can show it.
So,
no, I cannot.
I don't think my shirt is public for purchase. I'm sorry. And so, did cruiser design affect battleship design? Not a ton. There was a Black Prince in the Dido class. So Edinburgh was sunk by and was carrying a bunch of gold at the time that she was sunk. All but 2 bars of that gold have been recovered by now. So.
And no, Fishnet, I'm not using Burn It Down on Edinburgh. I wasn't using that skill at all. I don't know what you're talking about.
And so, and Edinburgh also, before she sunk, she basically soloed 3 German destroyers and basically critically damaged all 3 of them, but then sunk. So, let's see. When does the giveaway end? On Monday.
Yes, so we'll announce the winners on Monday. Essentially, you can go on the Discord, react with the emote, and you can win 4 Exeter, 4 London, 4 Cheshire.
So before we move on to the final announcement, does anybody have any final questions?
We haven't played the Albemarle, we haven't played the Soray, but I guess you guys know what you're expecting.
Yep.
But we still have time for a few questions for sure. What do you know about the monitors HMS Erebus and HMS Terror?
HMS Erebus and Terror were a pair of monitors in the First World War. If I remember right, they were armed with the 15-inch or the 15-inch guns. I don't know very much about them. I don't very much worry about monitors personally, but yeah. So one question a little bit earlier above, but I can't remember. Straw poll. What is the next nation?
Yes. What we can do is essentially for the last few minutes, there is a straw poll going on right now. If you guys enjoyed this stream, there is a current straw poll where Lane is essentially going to... okay, let me collect my thoughts here. The goal of this straw poll is to vote on which theme and ship line the next Ship of Alliance stream will be about.
That's a good question. Did carrier affect British cruiser designs? A little bit. Carriers allowed British cruisers to have less of a focus on aircraft ability, though they kept it around. So what's my favorite British cruiser in this time period? It would be the Dido class for sure. But what's yours, Robin?
My favorite in this time period, I think that's why I put the Leander on the screen. I have a personal attachment to this ship because first, I feel like it looks fantastic. I think that out of all the British cruiser design, she has some boxy lines, but the single funnel reminds me a lot of my second favorite ship, which is possibly the Nürnberg. And they both have that kind of single funnel, very, very, I don't know, the way the ship looks, the way it performs, the tool set she has, the very small citadel in-game. And there's just something about this cruiser that I really like. First of all, its looks. Second of all, its gameplay, both on PC and Legends, actually. And I don't know why, I feel like, yeah, it's probably one of my favorite ship. I don't know much about the history. Lane talked a lot about it. The second one would be Belfast, naturally, because, you know, who does not love Belfast, first of all, because, you know, she was part of most of the important battles, plus participated in the Hunt of the Scharnhorst, which is also an interesting story to tell. And yeah, and that she's the only surviving cruiser of World War II. So these are just
so that's the question about the HMS Toaster, or the Cavalier Toaster. I can answer a little bit of it. Cavalier does have a quadruple gun toaster, and it was put onto the ship in 1957. So and the refit, the Cavalier's refit in 1957. Another question I saw about North Cape. The cruisers were down to like 20 to 24 knots at North Cape. Realistically, you wouldn't really be able to get better seakeeping than that. The Battle of North Cape was horrendous conditions for sailing.
It was the worst possible thing you could ask for, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much.
Horrible visibility, rough sea keeping.
Yeah, and so Belfast, I do not believe, landed the last shell onto Scharnhorst. I think basically the real shells that were doing the damage at North Cape was Duke of York.
You guys with the HMS Toaster meme. Yeah.
Yup. So, yep.
I don't know if you want to keep going. I don't know if there's any more games to play. I don't know if you guys still have any questions. Go for it. We've been going for like...
There's one guy asking you to play Cheshire.
Cheshire. I can do a game with Cheshire.
I'm fine with doing answering questions and doing a game with Cheshire.
I'm not saying it will be a good game, but okay. For this
I guess I could talk about the role of cruisers in the battleship engagements. The key, like, I guess out of the 70 cruisers allowance, how many were allocated to the defense of the British Isles? It's a good question that I do not know the answer to. I couldn't give you a realistic answer to that. So the announcement is at the very end of the stream.
You guys have to be patient.
Yeah, so we'll probably after this game.
Yes.
So
depending on how it goes.
Yeah.
If I get blown out of water, I'll probably play another one.
Yeah. So the and so in the battle, in the dramatic Arctic battles between Scharnhorst and Bismarck, well, not between them, but the battle of, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
the cruisers played a pretty important role, especially the Norfolk and Suffolk, if I remember right, in the battle against Bismarck. Basically were chasing Bismarck and Prince Eugen into Hood and Prince of Wales, and shadowing them and keeping the radar on them. They were meant to engage Prince Eugen whenever they could during the battle, assuming that Hood didn't have that happen to her. So the Suffolk and Norfolk were involved there. Also, the Sheffield was involved quite famously with the Bismarck engagement. Sheffield is a town class cruiser. Suffolk and Norfolk are of the county class. Belfast, of course, appeared prominently in the engagement with Scharnhorst, as did Norfolk. Norfolk's guns were larger than Belfast's guns and basically appeared as if Norfolk was a battleship. And a lot of Scharnhorst's crew thought that Norfolk was a battleship because they couldn't see clearly. Yeah. I'm probably missing one.
What was, do you think, the most intense or decisive engagement involving cruisers in World War II or World War I?
Most decisive engagement was definitely the First Battle of Savile Island. But that was mostly a USN IJN battle, but HMS Canberra was there, or Canberra. So
that was relatively late with World War II already.
Yeah, that's 1943.
Yeah,
so,
okay. So like
or,
the British cruiser doctrine was already set up like in
yeah. That's not, no, that's not. It's the end of 1942. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, more or less mid. All right.
Yep.
Oh, hello. Good luck, Mahan. I mean, Mahan should be able to eat a T-61 alive with his guns.
Yeah.
And I've been spotted, which is not
Yeah,
ideal.
Matapan's up there for British cruiser, or British cruiser engagements, but like a lot of that's on Valiant and Warspite, to be honest, as well. But yeah, the British cruisers often were playing more of a supporting role rather than like a solo role like a lot of American cruisers did. So they didn't have like a sort of, other than like the battle against Graf Spee, they didn't really have a sort of battle where it's just them versus other cruisers. Java C is a confusing mess. So I can't really comment on Java C. There's too much going on there. And that I don't know at this time. Best cruiser tactician during World War II. Best cruiser tactician. I mean, Norman Scott did a fairly good job while he was around, or while he was alive. I'm not sure. That's a hard question for me. So why did the U.S. Not put torpedoes on, whereas the British and other nations did? So the U.S. did put cruisers on, did put torpedoes on their cruisers in the 1920s. However, their cruisers were already like highly stressed, so they needed to remove some weight later on. They were also afraid of torpedoes detonating and causing damage. And so they were afraid of that happening. So, oh yeah, Mikawa is a good answer for best cruiser tactician. So, yeah, I'd probably go with Mikawa, Genichi Mikawa. And so, but moving on, the U.S. carrier cruisers, they had the torpedoes removed because they were afraid of detonating, basically, as well as there were extra weight that they didn't need. Yes, there were 5 King George V class battleships. So you have King George V, Prince of Wales, Duke of York, Anson, and Howe. Howe has the best cookies. Which cruiser for the Royal Navy had the best, most accurate guns? I'm not sure which one. If I had to put money on it, it would probably be Belfast. because Belfast was really stable compared to most other cruisers, as well as the most modern and largest. So let's see. Well, the thing with Norman Scott was that he was not the man in charge at the time. So during in the engagement that got him killed, he was technically more senior, but there was another admiral in charge. Let's see. Let's see. British War Prize ships. I'm not sure what you're meaning by. So Norman Scott died in a confusing night battle, one of the night battles of Guadalcanal. He was aboard USS Atlanta, but USS Atlanta was friendly fired by USS San Francisco, if I remember right, and Norman Scott was killed in that friendly fire. Let's see.
So this is gonna be a bit of a gamble, chat. I am assuming California is AFK. If she's not AFK, I'm probably going to be dead. If she is AFK, I'll be able to brawl the. And she's not AFK, so I'm probably dead.
Yeah, Chicago's commander at Savo Island is up there for one of the worst cruiser commanders in World War II. To be fair to that guy, though, he was under quite a lot of pressure because he was suddenly put in command, and was not meant to be in command at that time. But yeah, he completely messed up that battle. Let's see, Marblehead, Omaha, Phoenix. Sorry. Yeah, the U.S. got Prince Eugen, Russia got Nuremberg. Britain did not get a German cruiser. So yeah, I think they got some destroyers that they gave to France. Let's see. Shell ballistics of the Royal Navy. So shell ballistics in game are pretty accurate to real life, at least in terms of muzzle velocity and penetration power. So that's up. Are you gonna get him? Are you gonna get him? Boop boop. Oh, he's alive.
I think she has a permaflood though. Oh no, maybe she'll decommit. Maybe she should then commit. No, I think she's flooding for a bit.
Yep.
Well, that's as good as I can go. I was expecting that California to be AFK, but well, she was, which is unfortunate. And I should have hit all 4 torpedoes, which I also didn't.
Yep. So
Okay,
yeah, the draw of a hat was between the USSR.
I may get a kill actually.
So the draw of a hat was only German ships. It was between the USSR, the United States, and Britain. And Prince Eugen and Nuremberg were only part of that. There were also a bunch of submarines and destroyers involved in that too. So, and they were split into thirds, basically.
You gotta love that, right, chat? Okay.
So, I think
Mr.
it's time.
Princeblip, do you feel satisfied with the information you've been given during this stream?
I think so.
You've given up.
I hope I did. I hope I covered things well enough. There is so much more to cover because like each class of British cruisers has like several subclasses and different stories, but we tried to cram it all into 2 hours for you guys, and I think we successfully did it in 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours is pretty neat. It's, to give you guys a bit of a perspective, for the last 2.5 weeks or more, Len has been actively reading and taking notes in a book only for this stream. So he's putting a lot of hearts into it, and I have to be very impressed because he's been talking for 2 hours straight, keeping everything entertaining while I was providing the worst possible gameplay you could ever hope for.
Yep.
And so if we could get some thanks and hearts in chat for Mr. Princeblip, I think that would be a good appreciation of all the work he's been doing, because that's commendable,
Yep.
to the least.
And so what is the result of the straw poll?
So let's check it out. results of the straw poll are going to be as follow. Let's open it. So far, after 2.5 hours, I'm going to vote. Of course, I'm going to go for French battleships because bias. French battleships have the high hand with 44%, followed by US N destroyer with 36%, and then Japanese aircraft carriers with only 20%.
French battleships is going to be interesting.
So I don't know how long you wanted the straw poll to last for. Until the end of the
That's fine. So we'll go with French battleships.
So French battleships it is. Merci beaucoup. Ça fait plaisir. Lecture assez français, c'est génial. So let's go for this. Here we go. Thank you all guys for voting. There was how many votes? 120 votes, which is half of our viewer base. So thank you very much for that.
Yep.
Merci à vous et très bonne soirée. Claudius, only French people I've seen talk in chat right now. That's great. So what I will do is I will let Lane do an outro, say whatever he wants. We'll switch to directly to what you guys have been waiting for, which is the small announcement we have to make for you guys.
Yep.
So I will just do my own, I will just say my own things. Thank you guys for participating on this stream. It's the second one we're doing, so we're collecting a lot of information on you know, how many people are watching and so on and so forth. And the chat, sorry if we couldn't read all the questions. You can imagine that only 2 hosts with 1 person talking about history, and you know, it's difficult to have like a proper chat interaction with you guys. So if you have any things you wish to change in these streams, please contact us on social media, on Discord, leave commentaries on the YouTube VOD if you see it, to tell us what we can improve during these live streams, because Princeblip wants to make it a series and we want to support him doing that. So thank you for being here, and good night, have a nice weekend. I'll switch this to Princeblip, and after Princeblip we'll have our announcement. So guys, take it easy. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
So thank you for coming, everybody. I'll start reading for French battleships. So the primary sources for this video was Norman Friedman's British Cruisers of 2 World Wars, which is an excellently well-written book and very well researched. Norman Friedman is a legend in naval history circles, and also David K. Brown's Nelson the Vanguard. That is part of a 4-book series of just British warships from the Age of Sail to Vanguard. And is also an excellent book, and I highly recommend all of them. And so thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you for listening to me ramble on for 2.5 hours. And I'll start writing more in the Notebook of Wisdom and bring it to you next month sometime. And we'll share that information as soon as I have it. And so without further ado, we shall move on to the announcement of what's what in the future. So thank you and have a good night.